Cool. So on the motion, this House opposes businesses' growing use of tiered loyalty programs. PM whenever you're ready.
One second, sorry. Uh, Very close. Okay. Two arguments. First, this is an anti-competitive practices. First, let's analyze businesses that already exist in the status quo, specifically small businesses. We think that with the existence of tiered loyalty programs, small businesses are inevitably going to have to implement this sort of loyalty system. Why is that? It's because when you already have a pre-existing loyalty system, you're going to be attracted to that business, and smaller businesses need to compete with those sorts of programs, so they're going to implement these sorts of loyalty programs. Why is that really, really bad? Because when you implement a loyalty program, you are necessarily discounting some of your items. That means that you are taking a decreased marginal payment from your costs. Why is that really, really bad, especially for small businesses? We think that already small businesses are massively outpaced by large firms in the market. That's for a few reasons. First is just economies of scale. They have massive amounts of factories and networks, which means they can distribute their fixed costs across a wide variety of different things, but also they have connections with their suppliers. They mostly own a lot of their different things. They do both horizontal and vertical integration, which means they just have more market setting power. That means that with the existence of loyalty programs, you just force small businesses who are going to create these sorts of loyalty programs to compete with these large businesses to cut their marginal benefits even more. The second impact we think this has on anti-competitive businesses is not just for existing businesses, but for businesses trying to enter the market. We think that this actually makes it harder to attract people to your business just out of sheer quality. Because if you think about it from an economics perspective, what a loyalty program actually does is it puts an economic tax on newness. It puts a premium on pre-existing businesses, even if they weren't actually that good, and it makes it more costly to switch your purchasing power or your supplying to this other provider. That means that if there are quality improvements,
Point
they
of
have to be
information.
much larger. That means they not only have to outpace the initial quality jump to actually attract buyers, but also outpace this additional tax that loyalty programs essentially place on them for imposing some sort of new quality. But before we move on to the next argument, we'll take the point of information.
Small businesses already have access to social loyalty, like liking and being friends with the business owner. So it's unjust to permit this, but not allow multinational corporations the same access to loyalty through their own means.
Right. So we think that if this is a principled claim, there's a bunch of principled claims about why like a small business should have more benefits than a large multinational corporation. But we also think that this social loyalty isn't necessarily outweighed by the massive economic benefits. Like, sure, I love my local business shop, but if they're selling me like $8 designer donuts, I'm probably just going to go to Dunkin' every time. Because of these increased marginal costs that small firms bear that are so much higher, we think it is massively more difficult to attract people off of social loyalty as opposed to economic loyalty. Now, let's move into the second argument is that we think this is a form of regressive taxation. Two arguments here. First, from a basic economic standpoint, we think it is just unintuitive and bad economics that the people who spend more should pay less, right? We think it is a principled argument and just a bad economic argument. First, from a principled argument, the people who already have more privileges in society. So you compound their effect, you lead to more inequality in the system. That is just a bad way to set up a sort of system, but also just from an economic standpoint, not even a principled argument. We think that people who spend more money, who buy more Chick-fil-A sandwiches, probably have a higher marginal willingness to pay. They're not as scraping by for money. They have more liquidity, so they're more likely to pay $12 for a chicken sandwich as opposed to six. But what this loyalty program does is it
Point of
reverses that.
information.
Those people who have no more points for the speech, those people who have higher marginal willingness to pay are going to have decreased costs, which just reverses the actual economic incentives that we actually should be incentivizing. The second argument under this regressive taxation point is not only is it really bad economics, but we really think from a behavioral economic standpoint, it changes the incentives of individual actors in the market that are going to these sorts of firms. This is for a few reasons. First, we think these loyalty programs are often gamified. It's things like points, it's things like status, it's things like, getting up to that next level. It's sort of gamified and it works on your psychology of achievement in order to make it feel like spending money is actually achieving something. But also, it's constantly with you, right? They send you notifications when you sign up for this. It's often accompanied by email lists or by, a sort of subscription-based model. And so it's always exposed to you, which means that like you're less able to have this sort of like rational perspective on it because they're constantly telling you it's the best deal, it's the best deal. But also from the idea of like a status or social standpoint, there's a lot of people who view themselves as like Delta people or Southwest people, and they aren't switching from one model to another because it's already a social status to be in this sort of VIP class, to board the airplane first, to do all these sorts of things. But apart from all these sort of minor behavioral incentives that it changes on your psychology, we just think that people, especially people under high financial stress, believe that this is the best deal, even though it actually isn't the best deal. That's because the messaging that these advertisers push is that when you accrue this sorts of loyalty status, you can achieve better deals and even better deals, which means that even if opening opposition says that it allows for competition and it allows for switching, they have to actually prove that people are rational enough and have a low amount of financial stress that they can actually make those logical, rational decisions instead of like going by the mental heuristic that like, oh, I'm a platinum member, it's probably just cheaper for me than the actual economic status quo. Now, on all these impacts, what is the actual win? First, on the anti-competitive thing, why is competition really, really good? We think that when you have more options at your disposal, it gives you more options to see what you like and to see determine between different levels of quality. Not only does this mean you as a consumer are more happy, but it means that there are actually just more quality on the market overall. Quality gets rewarded, bad quality gets taken away. Also, when there's more players in the market, people are driving up quality. They're competing against one another, consistently trying to one up one another to attract buyers. When you add this sort of market distortion on the market, you decrease the value of actual new innovation. That is an unfair way that doesn't actually reflect the value that it provides to consumers. But when we decrease tiered loyalty, we mean people explore more and have incentive to return to the same shop for an additional discount is a entirely economic manipulation. We think a better world is where people are acting rationally. There's not both these economic and mental psychological tricks that are preventing people from choosing the right decisions. We think the consumer should be able to make the choice, not be trapped by these corporations. Thank you.
Cool. I thank the PM for a fine speech. The open opposition bench, leader of opposition, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, hello everybody. Just before my speech starts, please offer a POI verbally if you wish to make one, but leave 15 or 20 seconds in between them, please. No badgering. Right, thank you. Okay, so just get my notes. I will start my speech in 3, 2. Oh wait, hang on a sec. I've got my headphone cables attached to my chair. Right, okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay, it is unfortunate that opening government have not provided a great deal of framing as to what this motion is going to look like in practice and what the two sides of this motion are going to look like. So first on the agenda for opening government is to provide this framing, and then once we've provided this framing, to explain what the impacts are likely to be. Okay, so what is this going to look like? What is this tiered loyalty system going to look like in the real world? We think that one, tiered loyalty system rewards people for spending more time and money at a particular business, in the sense of like, if you have a Tesco's club card, you are more likely to shop at Tesco's compared to other places because you're likely to get deals. These deals will look like a couple of things, right? Like, first of all, there could be like a buy one, get one free, but also a lot of loyalty systems offer a system whereby they offer you like a random selection of items, right? For example, so after you've got a certain number of points, they might offer you a certain free item. For example, they offer you like some free fuel, or in a supermarket, they might offer you like some free lemons that they have like on offer or something like that, or like a product or service that they offer, perhaps one that you don't usually consume, or one that they have like an excess supply of, and therefore they want to get rid of some, and therefore they put it on offer, right? So you might get an offer on chocolate bars, for example, or you might get an offer on some like fruit or vegetables that are likely to go off in the next couple of days, where you can pick them up for free or for very cheap. This is a pretty common system that supermarkets use, certainly here in the UK. I don't know if it's prevalent elsewhere in the world, but I think that this is likely to occur for a couple of reasons. Right, it is likely that if you're high up on the loyalty scheme, you can get goods and services for cheaper than if you're not on the scheme or on a lower tier of the scheme. I think this is pretty intuitive and pretty much encapsulated within the info slide. But on opposition, we think that it's likely that businesses will use this kind of tiered loyalty scheme to its full extent. Why? Because it probably creates an incentive for other firms to also bring it in, right? At the point where one firm starts using it, for example, one supermarket starts using the tiered loyalty system and starts offering like free or discounted items that they have an excess supply of, we think it's likely that other firms will also bring it in, one, to compete on price, two, because it's necessary to compete on price because a lot of people will buy the cheapest option, especially in cases where goods are interchangeable or closely similar, right? For example, presumably if there are 5 different shops that sell deodorant, the deodorant in each shop will be similar enough that if you just want a stick of deodorant, you will go to like whichever one is cheapest or whichever one is generally cheapest, and you will buy from them because at that point it's like, why not? And also because a lot of people are conscious of the amount of money that they're spending and feel that they do not want to spend more money on a good and service than is necessary to spend. Firms do not want to feel left behind by failing to offer discounts like on their loyalty cards and things like that, because loyalty card discounts, especially large ones on staple goods and services, like for example the staple meals like bread, for example, they attract customers, and the psychology of feeling like you're getting a better deal, right? For example, like if one company is offering me a free deal on spinach, for example, even if the rest of their food is more expensive, then I'm likely to psychologically feel as though I'm getting a better deal over there. So on opposition, why do we think that the world is substantively likely to be better for poorer consumers? This is our main push. Right, we think that poorer consumers are less likely to switch suppliers. Why is this? One, we think that poorer consumers tend to shop at whichever shop is cheap and close by, right? First, because of transportation costs, but secondly, because they want to get the best value for their money and they want to buy whatever is cheapest. I've already mechanized this, but I think it's also pretty intuitive. Two, poor consumers tend to spend a large proportion of their income in one place, right, for buying essentials, right? Because if you're poor, you're going to be spending a large proportion of your income on the basic essential things that you need to go about your day-to-day life. For example, food, fuel, and just basic necessities like that. Three, we think that poor people are likely to spend more of their money in one place in comparison to the general population. They are less likely to make big one-off purchases of like treats because often they can't afford those luxuries and they don't want to pay for those luxuries because they feel that it's taking a significant hit to their income. It's very likely that poor people will benefit from bulk deals on essentials and discounts and that they will receive a disproportionate benefits in relation to this. Right, the disincentive that the loyalty scheme provides to switch suppliers is not massively important for this demographic who tend to shop in bulk at larger shops anyway, because those shops tend to be cheaper due to the economy of scale mechanism that the Prime Minister has provided. Why is this important? Because people on the breadline will suffer massively if they find it harder to put food on the table in government where they are not able to benefit from these discounts. At the point where you are able to benefit from discounts on cheap goods and on basic goods and services, especially when you are already buying in bulk, likely at larger shops, this provides a basic benefit in the form of just being able to provide more food, more nutrition, more calories for your family who are on the breadline perhaps or who are struggling to make ends meet. Yes, PI.
Yeah. Are you more likely to walk across the street to go to the other grocery store if you are to find a better deal if you are poor or rich?
Are you more likely to go across the street to find a better deal at the nearby grocery store if you're poor or rich? Like, first of all, you're assuming that there are multiple accessible grocery stores in the area, but also it tends to be the case that like the competition mechanism will work better on our side of the house at the point where, as I've already mechanized, firms are like have an incentive on our side of the house to offer. Firms on our side of the house have an incentive to offer these loyalty discounts because they attract customers because of the psychology of wanting to get a better deal on these things. Right. Okay, so companies that offer you a random free item can provide much needed nutritional variety to the diet and much needed variety to like the goods and services that that a consumer is able to consume. Right. The ability to get discounts on things that are normally expensive and therefore normally outside of the purchasing power of people who are poorer can help to provide things that are like providing variety to their lifestyle and variety to their diet. Right. For example, if you live in a place where spinach is normally expensive, then being able to have access to that once in a while provides access to important nutrition and provides access to benefits like being able to have a supply of iron, for example. Government can provide no benefits in relation to this stakeholder because poor people are massively unlikely to shop at the small businesses that government are able to tell us about anyway, just purely because of the economy of scale making them more likely to shop at a larger shop, right? Therefore, no delta exists in relation to poorer people from the government side of the house, but opposition can tell you, OO can tell you that on opposition side of the house, these these people are likely to be more likely to be able to put core food items on the table and be able to put, firstly, a greater amount of calories overall on the table, right? Because if this loyalty scheme from this place that you're shopping from, likely to shop from anyway on either side of the house, the larger supermarkets, the supermarkets that are likely to be cheaper due to their economy of scale, at the point where you're already shopping at these places, the fact that they have a tiered loyalty scheme that you're likely to be higher up on the loyalty scheme of because of the fact that you shop there anyway frequently and because you spend a large proportion of your income on these places means that you are likely to be able to put more core items into your house, more able to put more core food on the table, simply because of the fact that you have access to buy one, get one free, simply because you have access to like the deals that allow you to purchase items for a lower cost, and because this allows you, therefore, to have access to staple items at a lower price, or potentially to have access to luxury items that have been discounted due to an increase in supply or due to the psychological mechanisms that I've discussed, and therefore are going to be available to you when they would not be available to you on government side of the house. But a final rebuttal to opening government. Opening government are not going to resolve the lack of competition between supermarkets and small startup shops. They cannot hit this tipping point because it is not clear to me, and it is not clear to me how it could ever be the case, why a small business is ever going to be able to compete with the economy of scale provided by a supermarket on either side of the house. And at the point where this is true, I think that the only clear impact that you've got so far in this debate is that provided by opening opposition. Thank you.
Cool. I'd like to thank the Leader of Opposition for a fine speech and invite DPM to summarise opening government whenever they're ready.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This debate does not take place in grocery stores for a couple of reasons. The entire mechanisms that come out of OO are there are fruits and vegetables that are going off and they go to the tiered loyalty system and therefore people get more nutritional value. I want to just gut check this. Insofar as things are going off, that means that people realize that's happening towards their expiry date, right towards the end. The typical mechanism that does happen is people slap stale stickers on it towards the end of the day and then it goes into a fridge. And then people, especially the poorer people, go towards the end of the day at 4 p.m. knowing that things will be cheaper, knowing that things are about to expire and supermarkets legally have to sell it too. I don't think you ever think of an app like going on Tesco for a club card and like spinach is being on sale. That is just empirically false. And secondly, I want to just mitigate a lot of the mechanisms that they give to you. Firstly, they tell you that, oh, people are less likely, poor people are somehow like living on the margin, but less likely to switch suppliers and do things on bulk. We think this is factually untrue. We think, for example, if poor people realize that vegetables are cheaper in one supermarket and something else is cheaper in another supermarket, therefore they switch deals and they go to different places in order to buy different things, because insofar as you're living so close to the bread line, you're trying to accrue like every type of money that is possible. We think you're actually more likely to look at all of your options and look at the grocery stores near you to understand where you need to go for things. We think that, oh, they try to tell you that the impact is benefiting on bulk deals, but we think that loyalty programs generally just reward you for the more that you pay, right? So in order to accrue these benefits, you have to be able to pay a substantially large amount. And we think generally poor people will just spend less on groceries. Poor people will not have the capacity to get to these royalty deals as quickly as possible. We're actually going to flip this argument and tell you that this is worse for poor people. Why? Firstly, supermarkets want to make a profit margin no matter the cost, right? So insofar as you are offering bulk discount deals, you are making things cheaper the more and more someone pays for it. You are making things cheaper for the people who spend the most. You will still need to make up your margins in order to be competitive because you're a profit maximizing business and you have the incentive to make so much as possible. The counterfactual that they have to defend is if there are tiered loyalty programs and suddenly things become like 50% off, things become free the more and more you spend, because this is typically proportional of the more you spend, right? So the more club card points you accrue, the more things you can get off in discount deals. That means in order for that to be possible, in order for things to still be profitable, especially in supermarket and grocery things where margins are so small and the profits on each individual item tends to be less, that means the initial price needs to actually be higher to offset the amount of discounts that are happening for the regular buyers, for the rich people who can spend more and more and get accrue. We tell you about regressive taxation. We tell you that this rewards the people who can spend the most. We tell you this rewards the people with the most money and the people who can get to these benefits the quickest because they have the most disposable income. So that means if it rewards them, that means the initial higher price that has to be offered in order to offset all of the loyalty benefits, because companies aren't just going to take a loss, they need to like make up the money somehow. It means that the poorest people who can't afford to buy in bulk, who can only afford to buy one or two of things, who can like have to wait for the longest time, who can only buy one thing, who can't get to rewards, actually get all of their items and goods at a more expensive price, which means all of the benefits that OO try to claim just don't happen. And it also means that the entire mechanism for more nutritional quality things is just like unlikely to happen. And if it does happen, it will be because it goes on sale. Moving on to defending our points.
Points of information.
Firstly, I'll take the POI.
So you claim this doesn't happen in supermarkets, which is empirically false, but where would you say these things happen?
We say the majority of this debate takes place in like small coffee shops and things like that, where people are going to like buy food, people are going to restaurants and loyalty systems, where the people in question do have disposable income, but because of the psychological effect of a tiered system, do not look around and therefore do not go to small businesses. I'm going to give a couple of extra mechanisms as to why this is the case. Firstly, insofar as these people can still afford to go to a small business, the moderate middle class choose to not explore for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the psychology of these tiered reward systems are gamified, right? So it looks like 2 more to get a free coffee. It looks like a tier and a dashboard where you're trying to spend more money, where you're trying to do this as much as possible because you get a free sweet treat or because you get something that you wouldn't have bought for yourself in the first place. It looks like being inundated with notifications saying, oh, like you have this many points to the next reward. It looks like signing up to an email list where you get more and more things of like this deal is available that makes you feel like you're saving money even though you're not, because as we told you, the counterfactual that they have to define is where prices on the whole are cheaper because companies don't have to make this margin. This increases the rationalization needed to go to a small business, and this is for a couple of reasons. The reasons is the tipping point. I think we agree with OO framing that everyone has to do this loyalty system, which is inherently a harm for smaller businesses because we told you in PMC they already are like not able to operate on the same cost margins because they don't have cross subsidization, because they don't have like the ability of economies of scale, and they already are just like inherently less profitable, which means in order to compete, in order to make their margins lower, when they have to like do these things, when they're already having to compete on price, and the differentiation between quality becomes less because people find it much harder to rationalize choosing, because now they not only have to rationalize quantity, they have to rationalize not actual cost, but perceived cost of going to the same place over and over again. And the thing is, behavior is typically sticky. When you set up your morning about going to a coffee shop or going to buy breakfast or lunch at the same place in the middle of a working day, it becomes embedded in your routine. Once you do it, you're much more likely to keep on doing it. You become familiar. And this, most importantly, is more important than a social cost, because the social cost isn't just like a small business owner knowing everyone. It could be a barista at Starbucks, which is a large MNC that still sees a customer every day and draws like a smiley face on the coffee, right? We don't think the social cost is symmetric, but we do think the ability to have a tiered loyalty system is important. And the reason that tiered loyalty systems can also be done better is because they can be better advertised by big corporations. They can be done on ads. They can go on social media. They can have like better, more sophisticated apps that people download. They can be much more entrenched as opposed to a small business, which will probably only have like a paper card that you can lose and not have the institutional knowledge to do it as well. So there'll always just be a lack of an ability to switch, which damages competition and damages small business profit margins who don't have the same financial capacity as the MNCs. Proud to propose.
Cool. Let's thank the DPM for a fine speech. Goes off top half the yellow whenever you're ready.
Hi, am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, hang on, let me just get a timer. Okay, cool. I will do primarily a comparative speech in order to support Lucas's case and way over OG, as well as some substantive extensions integrated. Note the speech might be shorter than planned because I expected DPM to give a bit more material, but mostly it was some extension of the PM, so I'll combine them both and just do a rebuttal in comparison to OG as a whole. Okay, so one of the primary pushes from OG was it creates a loyalty to large businesses and typically disregards smaller businesses, which has a harm on this section of the economy. Okay, a few responses here. Firstly, small businesses often also offer loyalty schemes, especially because they usually have a better connection to their customers. As it was brought up, they typically have a social loyalty because they have a smaller customer base and therefore are more likely to meet them. But just in general, when they are so dependent on getting more customers in order to turn themselves into a larger business, they also have the incentive to create some kind of loyalty scheme, even if it's just a punch hole and a little bit of card, to create some sort of semblance of a reward for people coming there and eventually drawing in more customers. However, it actually comes down to the type of person to buy from this business. Okay, A, what does the type of person likely to buy from a small business look like? Okay, it's more likely to be the wealthy or the middle class, because these types of people are the people that are more likely to have excess income to spend on niche or funny things and typically can afford the higher prices compared to the working class, who often do not have this kind of money in the first case. As Lucas says, we are going to focus mostly on the working class on the opposition side of the bench because they're a more important stakeholder for reasons I'll go on to. But why is the type of person that's actually going to buy into small businesses relevant? Okay, wealthier and middle class people can afford the higher money. They don't necessarily always want to shop at bigger businesses like Sainsbury's with a Nectar card, like the average working class person does, because they can afford higher quality or niche items like a smaller bakery that's made with love and looks aesthetically pleasing and has like a good customer relationship that looks aesthetically pleasing for like social media, etc. We think this impact provided by Gov is actually quite small because they failed to prove how small businesses are going to completely go under due to the scheme, when the scheme currently exists under the status quo and small businesses are typically thriving. Therefore, there's a lesser impact to small businesses on our side of the house because they're, or at least a symmetric one, because their customers tend to come from a different class band than the type of people attracted to any sort of reward scheme. They then went on to talk about how loyalty programs are often gamified to make you feel like purchasing is some kind of achievement, which can lead to a degree of overspending. A few responses again here. One, this isn't entirely true. The type of person to be dependent on these methods to earn discount are the type of people to feel some degree of guilt when spending money. What do I mean by this? Okay, it's more likely that we see people earning discounts slowly rather than mass spending, because people who are working class are often frugal with their money and money aware, not mass spenders, because they know how to penny pinch. They know they have the motive to make the constant right financial decisions because they work it out. They know they've got kids to feed. Two, things like getting sweet treats, as brought up by the DPM, don't always have to be rationalized. Why? Okay, sometimes these treats are a benefit in yourself. For example, getting cake on your birthday simply by being signed up to an app for a coffee shop is a clear benefit, because this is a treat that sometimes the working class may not always get, this cake or drink on their birthday, because they cannot afford it. It's simply just a bit of an uplift, and we think that there's an impact, although small, is still good on our side of the house. Thirdly, the government claim that this isn't always the best deal, but it usually is, or at least one of the best out there. For example, competition flipping the analysis. The competition equally exists that different companies can also offer deals that are better than the next, as Lucas started to talk about, and then the next and the next, i.e. if the Tesco Club card is better value for money than the Morrison's reward card, Morrison's are then forced to make their deals better in order to prevent loyal customers defecting elsewhere. Consumers will always manage to find the best case scenario. We think we steal the competition analysis and bigger impacts are on our side of the house. However, moving on to a few key extensions off of Lucas's case. Okay, what is the first extension here? Okay, firms have an incentive to provide discounts on items which excess supply to maintain customer loyalty to get rid of excess supply. DPM is being very uncharitable to our case, and therefore their framing is wrong. Large businesses absolutely use the system under the status quo. Second extension, why are the working class a uniquely important stakeholder? Because that's something Lucas started to say that went largely ignored by OG. that we help best on side opposition. Okay, some framing here. What does life actually look like for working class individuals? Okay, they suffer from a struggle. They're often living on the breadline. They're far more likely to be frugal, meaning they do not have much money to begin with and want to save where they can. If they start to embrace these schemes because it will eventually save them even just small amounts of money in the future, this was something Lucas begins to tell you. How do we actually help combat this frugality? Well, the reduction of prices where possible, even if it is just a small reduction, have savings that eventually add up. For example, the Nectar card lowering prices for most items. So why are they such an important stakeholder in this debate? Okay, the cost of living is always rising and class inequality grows on the regular. We prove that these schemes are highly likely to help the working class save money or at least help them cope with this gap. This is especially true when supermarkets face backlash when prices rise, meaning they are forced to lower prices, update these schemes, or offer further details in order to keep these customers loyal. So proud to oppose.
Cool. I'd like to thank the DLO for a fine speech. Speaker's POI is taking them as an important part of the game, factors into close decisions, and speaks. With that being said, though, at the back half member of government whenever you're ready.
Just give me a second. Okay. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. On our side of the house, everyone has more money, everyone has less shit they don't need. This is why we win. So, first, on framing, I want to note at the very top of my speech, to take out OO's case, is that there are always going to be cheap options. At their very best case, like, it's maybe a poor person, if they buy in bulk enough, is going to get, like, 1 free lettuce or something, like, every couple months. Like, this is not a very big impact on people's lives. It is very unlikely to actually significantly impact people, even in their best case. People already have options like Walmart, options like, cheap, like dollar stores, like grocery stores. There's already a market to specifically target people who cannot afford very expensive food. So I think like these people are not necessarily the most important actor, given that the savings, even in their best case, are only going to be a couple cents. But our second case on overspending flips their case implicitly. Because, and note the vertical extension over OG here, because when you have a deal, this necessarily requires buying more than you otherwise would. This is because, the only reason corporations are able to do this is because people are buying more when they do this than if they don't do this. Otherwise, it would be completely illogical to discount what they're selling. So, because they are doing this, they are incentivizing people to buy more. For example, you buy it in bulk rather than just buying the one thing that you do. You are therefore spending more money. But the second mechanism for this is that you have targeted ads, because the other reason corporations do these loyalty programs is so that they can collect data on what you are spending on, and they can then use that data to send you advertisements, to send you emails that aren't just like, oh, look at our company, the way that OG frames it, but are actually way more persuasive than that. They're like, oh, look at this specific thing. This deal will disappear in 1 week if you don't take it right now. And this incentivizes people to do this. Our mech here is stronger than OG's because we prove why targeted advertisement is more effective, therefore why people are going to be spending more money there on things they, again, don't need. The third reason for this is the sunk cost fallacy. If you are in a loyalty program and they're telling you, hey, so you already bought 5 coffees, and if you buy 10 coffees, you get a free coffee, then you feel like you've already put some work into this. You're going to want to put in more work to get this big flashy benefit, even if it's not something you actually want, because this is the psychological operation behind it. And the fourth thing is just on status. Note that OG's mechanism on status is not actually unique, because they just say that people have brand loyalty. But people have brand loyalty on both sides of the house. This is flagged in the POI from CO, which is correct. But it's also just people are loyal to Samsung and Apple and whatever, even if they aren't part of the loyalty program. But the thing that we specifically have when you have these loyalty programs is things like an exclusive club that you are advertising You are part of a group of people who is like the exclusive in group who gets these special discounts. And this is something that is particularly attractive to people, more so than just being a part of a brand and getting deals. It's like, oh, you can be like a gold star Starbucks member, or I'm not part of the loyalty program, so I don't actually know what the name is. But and then you activate this kind of peer pressure thing where it's like if you're like a 15-year-old girl and all of your friends at school are members of Sephora and
POI.
are reaching these different like gamified like levels of the Sephora app, then you want to also reach that level so that you can be part of the group and talk about these things and get these like flashy benefits. It becomes this kind of like social thing. So all of this, therefore, proves why people are buying things that they would not otherwise on our side of the house. Now, the reasons why this are harmful, there's a few of them. The first is just that you are spending more money, and this is like very simply on like you are spending money on things that you do not actually need, because if you need them, you'd buy them on either side of the house. But because you're only buying them because of this corporate coercion, they're not something you actually need or necessarily something you actually want. The reason why this is bad is because it's better to spend your money on things that you actually want, either to save it up for like a trip that you would rather go on, or to just like
POI.
buy something that you would prefer to have, to save your money, or whatever else you would do with it. Literally anything you're doing it is going to be better. Because know that the mechanisms that you are like the things that you are gaining by spending it on things like social status and clout is always going to be like a continuous ladder. Like even if you reach the gold star level of Sephora, you're going to want to go to the diamond level or whatever. And so yeah, and so because we give these clearer harms of lost money, this is also another vertical on OG. But I also want to flag the way that this differentiates from all of front half is that this isn't just like the poorest people. Like, yes, they are included, they are of course impacted by this, but this is also literally everyone. Like, this is like, teenagers who
POI.
are like pressured into like being a part of Sephora's
Wait.
program. This is like parents who are being pressured into like buying better stuff for their babies or whatever. This is also not just small businesses. Like pretty much everyone is a part of some kind of loyalty program. Everyone is kind of affected by this. But the second harm of overspending here is also just that you have too much stuff. This is a horizontal extension as well, in that you actually have environmental harms when you are buying more stuff than you need. This looks like people going to Starbucks and buying things like more coffees that come in more single-use cups that they are then throwing out, putting more microplastics into the environment, killing the turtles with the straws and whatever. I'll take the closing quickly.
Yeah. But if you go to Starbucks and you do the loyalty program, they give you a reusable cup. So now it's good for the environment. Checkmate.
No. 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 Okay. So yeah, and it's also things like more like if we're going to take the grocery case, it's like more food that you throw out because you're now buying in bulk instead of buying specifically the things that you need, more food waste. The comparative here is actually the companies would just but buy less of these products in the first place because OO wants to claim that they're getting rid of like their extra stock that they would have had anyway, but this is totally not true. If you're a company that knows that you can do these like pushing these kind of status things that make people want to buy just by like having a bulk deal because it is very effective, you are going to buy more product to try and pawn off as part of these bulk sales rather than just selling people exactly what they need. So this means you are actually importing more food into grocery stores and things that just then gets wasted and goes to nobody. The comparative, at least, is less like food waste there. And the final impact here also is just very basically that you have less clutter in your house. Like if you're doing things like constantly spending on things that you don't need and buying more and more clothing that you don't need because you want to be a part of like Amazon's loyalty program or whatever, you are like having fewer things that you actually like. You are prioritizing less the things that you actually like, and you were constantly surrounded by this kind of, general like stuff that you didn't actually want in the first place. For all these reasons, proud to propose.
Cool. I thank the member of government for a fine speech. Member of opposition, whenever you're ready.
Okay, now I'm audible because I'm not muted anymore. Wave at the camera or like use your raise hand function or whatever. That's how I'm going to take my POIs. Cool. Starting my speech in 3, one response to opening government, which is that I literally could not give less of a shit about small businesses. Opening government gave me zero reasons. What happens maybe is these small businesses shut down, Costa buys out the place, and now they sell me cheaper coffee. Genuinely, who gives a shit? The case from closing opposition is very simple. You get access to more data as a large company and more stable forms of revenue, and so you're able to drive down costs across the board for everyone, even if they aren't holding club cards. Firstly, how then do these large corporations determine price? Obviously, they have to take into account input costs and making sure they're able to meet specific margins, etc. But a big thing they have to consider is that a lot of things go unsold. I think opening opposition touch on this, but their analysis is vulnerable to the yellow sticker response from opening government. I think the actual stuff here is if, for example, you are an airline, which is one of the large industries that does this, you have to fly planes from X to B fairly frequently, and sometimes these seats are empty. And now you have the same amount of fixed costs, i.e. you're still flying a fucking plane across the world, but there's now a lot more empty seats. How do you solve this on our side of the house? When you have loyalty programs, you encourage people, first of all, to consume a lot more, but second of all, you're able to predict the types of consumption that they're likely to engage in because you have access to all the data that closing government talks about. What this means is that when anyone is buying any product from any of these companies, they now have to subsidize the unsold cost to a far less extent because you are increasing consumption per CG's analysis, right? And so as a result, it means that when I am buying from Tesco or I'm buying a booking a flight or whatever, the price no longer has to account to the same extent the cost of the fact that some of the goods and services that they provide are going to go off or aren't going to be sold, etc. Maybe yellow stickers still exist on our side of the house, but the margin is still larger on our side of the house in terms of the amount of money that the company is able to save by pawning off these discounts in this particular way. There are a number of responses you could give here, right? It's like, why can't you just provide discounts to everyone? But the problem is at the point where you do this, it's now more you're more vulnerable to randomness. That is to say, it's often difficult to predict, particularly in large companies, the exact form of revenue that you're able to get because different people have different preferences at different moments in time, and you don't have as much data per CG. And so as a result, what happens on our side of the house is, first of all, that there are going to be more people who are going to consume more because they want access to their loyalty benefits. But second of all, you're able to offer them cheaper prices, so you're more likely to do it. So you're able to have target discounts for some people to ensure that there's not a lot of deadweight loss, in particular in sectors. I mean, the other parts of the things that you sell no longer have to subsidize this form of deadweight loss. What this then means is that you're just able to massively decrease costs across the board. And I want to be really cheeky here, because opening government say big businesses are able to have cheaper costs because they have economies of scale, and closing government say that this results in massive amounts of increase in consumption. Presumably then, this means you get more economies of scale on our side of the house. If you combine their analysis, you're able to drive down costs to a far larger extent, which means more people get cheaper stuff. The thing I want to be clear about then is there's a number of responses. This first, you could go, but people just they won't pass on the savings to consumers. But the problem is a lot of the industries where this happened are highly competitive. And then fucking DLO says this, but it's a knife of LO, and also DPM says this. But you do just have to buy that poor people like saving money, so they're not able to often conceptualize saving money in the long term because they don't have the money to save in the long term. They want to be able to ensure that they're able to feed the family tomorrow. So they're not going to say, if I go to Tesco multiple times and spend more money than I would otherwise, eventually I'll start saving money. That doesn't mean that they do because they don't have the money in the immediate now to do this sort of business practice or economic saving, right? So ultimately, this means that when they have the ability to drive down costs and the fact that there are multiple large companies that are doing this, they now have more capacity to drive down costs, so they're now more likely to drive down costs, which means you're able to save money for everyone. The weighing here is very straightforward, which is that not everyone accesses these loyalty benefits to the maximum extent. But you were able to drive down costs for everyone across the board. Empirically in airlines, for example, this is very true, with that massive decrease in airline travel costs have happened over the last 20 years, and a lot of that has been driven by the fact that, first of all, technological innovation, but also because of the fact that you're able to have much better prediction in terms of what you do. I'll take Yale BNT.
Okay. Are costs lower when there are multiple small businesses competing with large businesses, or in businesses where there is only one large company running a monopoly?
So there are two things that affect cost, right? The first is the capacity and the second is incentive. You give me a trillion reasons why small businesses don't have the capacity to compete against large businesses regardless. And so it doesn't matter, right? As long as you have a few large companies that are competing against each other, you're able to ensure that you have the fact that prices are able to drive down. Even if there's no small grocery store, I can go to Tesco, or I can go to Morrison's or Aldi and Lidl, etc. So there's obviously still competition there. Prices go down as a result on our side of the house. But the second thing I want to point out is you get more targeted discounts. CG say they have more data on you. I think this is good. On our side of the house, you get spammed with advertisements, but on our side of the house, Tesco now know that I spend a lot of money buying veg stuff because I want to decrease my meat consumption, and now they're able to send me targeted advertisements of discounts on meat substitutes. I think that's probably a good thing if they have access to more data because they're better able to understand my preferences. their attempt to make this like a bad thing, then you probably aren't in such a precarious economic situation. Actual poor people who are living paycheck aren't vulnerable to this sort of advertising because well, either I buy lentils to feed my family or I buy these shoes that are on discount by Tesco. Obviously that's not the type of calculus that they're doing because it's actually more proximate and immediate in terms of the harm that happens if they make the incorrect decision. So the margin is on people like myself who do have more money to spare. We might buy more stuff. I think this is fine. This drives the economy broadly, increases their ability to drive down costs because they have more economies of scale now. As a result, they're able to import more stuff. There's also just a few immediate benefits you get from the fact that you have two levels. You have more certain economic input. You're more able to predict the purchasing habits of the people who are in the higher tier, so you have a more certain revenue stream that's more predictable. The first is that you're able to engage in investment and expansion to a larger extent. That would say, at the point where you have a more certain stream of revenue, you're better able to do things like R&D because you know that you will definitely be able to make up the cost in other particular ways because you know people are guaranteed to continue to spend. You have a larger revenue stream that's also more certain. You're also able to expand, for example. So Tesco is able to open up more shops in more places because they know that they will have a guaranteed revenue stream from other stuff. Whereas if it's more predictable, it's a higher risk of you doing it. Investors are more likely to be spooked and less willing to do that, particularly industries that have historically small margins like grocery stores, like 3%. But the second thing I want to point out is that if you are just consuming more, this is good for everyone. Like Tesco is importing goods from other places in the world, and so if more people are buying the stuff from Tesco or more people are buying like airline tickets or whatever, you now have to employ more people, so you have more jobs. A lot of these jobs are located in the global south because you have poor people in Africa and Southeast Asia who are growing your rice for you to eat. I think it's good if people are now buying more things because now more people are able to be employed in these particular contexts. This is the lowest version of this. I think the other version that's actually fairly real is that when you're able to have a more guaranteed stream of revenue going forward into the future, you're more resilient to economic shocks and just economic crash and shutting down. And the weighing versus opening government is if a small business shuts down, a big business can buy them. I don't give a shit. If a big business goes bankrupt, the government has to bail them out, or either big government has to bail them out, or they can't get bought because they're too big to be bought out. If the government bails them out, this increases the taxpayers' burden, and if they don't get bailed out, then now you have a bunch of people who are now unemployed at a particularly acute time, which is probably bad. We're just able to drive down costs for everyone, and we give big corporations more data, and they probably use it in good ways. Freddy will do more weighing, but it's a clear CO.
Cool. Like the tech member proposition for a fine speech, government whips, and summarise proposition bench when they're ready.
Okay, sorry, I'm just setting stuff up. Okay,
If it's possible, could you come close to the microphone because it's quite shallow?
Yeah, sorry, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. I'm just making sure that you just make sure you don't move away from the microphone.
Okay, perfect. Okay. My time starts now. Panel in Canada is one of the biggest countries in the world to offer customer loyalty programs, and note that markets still exist for all consumers. There are markets for more affluent consumers, there are markets for customers who need more discount goods. Walmart and Sobeys exist in the same world, Sephora and Shoppers Drug Mart exist in the same world. What doesn't meaningfully change in this debate is what people can afford, to what extent economies of scale happen, how much costs are being driven down. What does meaningfully change is how consumers spend in their respective markets, how the level of spending increases, the level of overconsumption increases, and therefore the impacts that result from this. Like Tessa says, insofar as you can weigh the certainty of this case, you can put our case above other teams. Very proud to propose. So I think I want to first deal with the entire CEO case, which is I think the idea of driving down costs. First of all, in what world have airline costs become lower? I think that they've reasonably increased for lots. I think the airlines that have reasonably decreased costs are already airlines that have marketed themselves as discount airlines, that already have incentives to cut costs, to act to promote to that specific market of people who can't necessarily afford to fly on things like Emirates, things like Air Canada, British Airways, etc. A few reasons for why there's just a low margin of change for CO. First of all, I think for what I said before about how necessarily different areas want to keep perceptions of quality. So certain makeup brands, regardless of whether they want to whether they cut costs, whether they do loyalty programs, are still not necessarily going to lower their prices for consumers insofar as they're targeting markets, more affluent markets, consumers who use price as a signifier for higher quality. So I just don't think there's necessarily necessarily any change on whether you're actually getting cheaper goods in like other places. I think you're probably still getting them where like you're actually targeting people in lower tax brackets. I think this happens on most sides. But I think second of all, I just think there's just no incentive to lower prices with loyalty programs insofar as for all the reasons why Tessa gives you. Why does already incentivizing marketing? Why does already sunk cost fallacy where people still want to spend more to gain those points, to gain that threshold, to get those free stuff? Insofar as I feel like your loyalty program is going to ensure your customers are going to buy your products regardless for the price that you set it as. I don't see the incentive to lower price even if you cut costs. But I think third of all, even giving up, I just think the margin the delta is just really low, because I think all teams have established that economies of scale exist on both sides, that places like Walmart are always going to want to make things affordable for people, cut costs and make things affordable for lower income, insofar as that is how they stand out in the market, and that is how they actually get a reasonable share of the market for people who need to afford groceries and outside this. So I just don't think I think the margin of change is just extremely low for CO. Note how OOS also falls into this, as Tessa tells you, because I think the market is always going to exist for vulnerable consumers. I think this is always going to happen. What reasonably changes on our side? For all the reasons Tessa tells you on why there's always going to be pressure to spend. Note how CO says that a lot of influx money in the economy is probably a good thing. Sure, I think the market is always striving to this, but I think the market has also reasonably changed and has acknowledged that overconsumption is leading to environmental harms. There's harms in constantly turning over your inventory. There's harms in things always being temporary and everything being disposable. So I think the market has an incentive to reach that sort of to also reach that sort of balance while keeping money flowing in the economy, for all the reasons to explain why this just still meaningfully happens on both sides of the house. So what specifically happens on our side is, first of all, again, the idea of what Tessa's telling you as things like a status symbol. So when you have a Sephora loyalty card, it means you feel more feminist. When you have a Tim's loyalty card, it means that you feel more nationalist to your country. Your loyalty card adheres to the values that you respect about yourself, and therefore you already have that psychological effect for why you're necessarily going to use this more. But also just the idea of like this targeted marketing where you constantly are getting notifications telling you, we have this new thing, you should buy it. Oh, you're so close to reaching gold status on your membership, you should do it. But I think third of all, I think all the reasons Tessa tells you for why you'd buy something you think you wouldn't. First of all, because you want to reach the next threshold of privileges in your loyalties, you always want to spend to reach it. Insofar as you feel like you're getting so close, you want to use it, you're in the program. But then second of all, I think because loyalty programs, as they become more advanced, as they have in Canada, there's constantly deals telling you you're going to get this many points if you buy our new product, if you do this, if you do that. So I think the incentive exists on our side. Impacts. First of all, everything Tessa tells you about overconsumption, and even if you don't buy the scale of this impact, because maybe people who do actually, yeah, sure, I'll take it. I'm running out of time.
Okay, so I don't know about where you live, but in the vast majority of the world, data protection regulations exist. So you can only use targeted marketing if you have consent. You can just not consent.
Yes, sure, but like that's not our point why data collection is bad. I think targeted marketing still exists. I think there's a lot of ways people consent this because they just don't see it as like very harmful for them, and then they get the targeted marketing. But then anyway, so basically on my point, so even if you don't think overspending is the biggest impact, I think everything Tessa tells you about the environmental impact is absolutely true. Few reasons for this. First of all, it's when consumers are, because when you're buying more, when you have an incentive to buy the new summer products, when you haven't even used your spring products, it means you have less use for your spring products. It means you're necessarily wasting them or leading to clutter or things that are meaningfully not being used when these loyalty programs increase. But I think second of all, the idea of inventory turnover. So insofar as these companies are are selling more because of these loyalty programs. There's now the incentive to produce more. So now there's a trickle down effect of all the resources that are going in to turn over your inventory more quickly, to have more things in order to keep up with the necessary amount of demand that loyalty programs are coming because of all of this. Panel, I think both opposition teams overall have a low margin of change into how it actually affects the market. And I think we also weigh about OG uncertainty, that insofar as you can't agree how it does necessarily impact the market, whether there's still demand for small business, I think you out to buy that people are going to spend more. This leads to more waste. This is probably bad for the environment and what we strive for in the society. Very proud to propose.
Cool. I'd like to thank the government whip for a fine speech and invite opposition whip to summarise opposition bench and the debate as a whole whenever they're ready.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I'll take PYs verbally, please. So something me and Ziyad have in common is we both don't give a fuck about small businesses. We love multinational corporations because they give us stuff for cheap. And I'm going to weigh us as consumers over the small businesses, because even if you're to buy OG's claim that the small businesses can't keep up, we don't really care. A small business owner, i.e. the type of person who's likely to suffer as a result, there are fewer of them, and second, they tend to be reasonably wealthy, and that's why they own businesses. So I don't care about them that much if they are a net loss as a result of this motion, if the consumers are net gains. The second thing the opening government tell us is that it is bad economics to let bigger spending consumers pay less over a long enough period of time. The reason this makes no sense is because there is a competitive incentive within a free market to implement a policy which will make your company money. If it was the case that these type of loyalty schemes were bad economically, then companies which did not use them would cleanly be out-competing the companies which do use them. But what I'm to believe from this debate is that in certain sectors of the economy, these things are quite widespread. And in a simple evolutionary level, the survival of the fittest has determined that these companies which engage in these tend to be better. And the reason why is just because obviously people would spend more at a company. It generates more demand for that company if they get these loyalty program points. This analysis is present on the Gov bench. There's obviously good decisions for a company. The third thing OG say is that it's immoral to let bigger consumers pay less. The reason this is not immoral is because it's in fact not taxation. This is the private sector. And the fun thing about the private sector is their only obligation of a company which exists in the private sector is not to you as a consumer, it's not to actually anyone other than their shareholders. And the reason why is if you are a consumer, and you don't have to cost anything to opt out of not purchasing from a company. You could just not do it. Whereas a shareholder, they are bought in. They have their money on the line, which is being affected by every decision that a company makes. Therefore, the only structural obligation of a company is to their shareholder. So I don't see where this immoral claim lands within this debate. The only moral obligation for a company to do is to grow the stock, is to grow their shares, is to grow their stock valuation. And I think Ziyad demonstrates that they do, and thus we're fulfilling not only practical aims, but principal ones too, since that is the purpose of free market. Fourth, they say consumers are locked into choices, and that ends up being anti-competitive. A couple of mitigations. The first is that humans tend to be habitual and will shop in the same places often anyway, so you can passively accrue these points. The second is that you can accrue points in multiple places, so you can still engage in competition in the market. You can get Nectar points at Sainsbury and points on your club card at Tesco. You could do these two things at the same time, so I don't see why necessarily competition is the trade-off here. However, I'm willing to take this trade-off, and the reason why we're probably speaking quite highly this round is because we're willing to take this trade-off and take teams at their best. And that's because we're even happy with a slightly less competitive market in a scenarios where we have a more stable market. Reason is because there's already sufficient competition, since a lot of the industries where this type of thing emerges, there's already good information, and OG do the analysis for us to prove that there's good information, because they say we're always being bombarded with this type of stuff. These industries tend to be things like airlines and supermarkets that we tend to know a lot as consumers about, because they're very clear what they're doing to us. So the macro shift has been we have good information about them. There is sufficient competition. There's still a lot of airlines and a lot of supermarkets. So the macro shift is these sectors have become more stable, and this solves for problems that existed and are unlocked. And this has unlocked a lot of investment. The margin to this claim is that you only needed a small margin of increased stability for a company like an airline, which are always at risk of going under, like Nordic Airlines did, because of the margins and the volatility of that industry. So if you can even marginally increase stability within this industry by having a less fungible type of token in order to spend, so you have more guaranteed income, then that unlocks more investment because you quell a lot of the fees of those investors. And this tends to be quite a lot of money for that reason. OG, I think, are quite roundly out just via rebuttal and us having a stronger case. Closing government have, let's say, like three main claims. The first is that data collection is bad. Brief response to this is that the bad stuff in data collection probably happens anyway. If you want to like abuse somebody with data, like Google and Microsoft will be hoarding this anyway. The margin of this is now other companies get to do this now and do the good stuff with it. As Ziyad tells you, like track your consumption habits so they can better satiate your preferences better. This is the margin of the data claim and why it breaks in our favor. Second thing they say is that you spend stuff on stuff you don't really want. I don't know how CG have access to the minds of the average consumer. Like, they're just saying what the consumer really wants. I don't know what the consumer really wants. This is flipped by the data claim. Data knows what consumers really want because they reveal their preference when they buy a bunch of stuff, and then algorithms can track what they want and then give them coupons for stuff that they like. And you're able to do this through this policy. I'm also just a bit unclear of the margin of a lot of the stuff CG say. Like, a lot of the bad things they say probably happen via advertising too. But even if it is true, my final flip on this is that there's greater aggregate demand if people spend more, even if it's on stuff that isn't necessarily useful. And then that greater aggregate demand translates into more jobs and a bunch of like useful things that I'll explain a little bit more later. Final things they say are one on the sunk cost fallacy, which is heavily mitigated by the fact that other companies try to undercut each other. Like this competition mitigates the sunk cost fallacy a lot. It's also mitigated by discourse. If this was such a bad deal and people were fallaciously falling into it, then the deals would just be lambasted by the average person on social media, which they tend to not be. These are pretty like nifty, nice things. I'll take OG. CG?
What is the differentiation in data that you get from a rewards loyalty program when you already have aggregated information on what people purchase, the timing of what that happens, and how does that create any meaningful difference as opposed to the psychological impact and harm of entrapping
you
customers?
collect the data because that's the basis of what you give the points on. Like Tesco Club Card literally does this. Final thing that says on climate change, this can probably be better solved if we have a better working economy, because then you can invest in the solutions that can help solve that, like build more dikes and things like that. Opening opposition have essentially a case that I think is rather narrow. They primarily only impact on people literally on the breadline. This is in countries where these policies exist, actually not that many people compared to literally everyone who benefits from Ziyad's impacts. Ziyad's impacts not only help everyone, but they also help poor people as a function of helping everyone. And that is through innovations like having faster planes and cost-saving innovations through greater R&D for more investment. They have more jobs through aggregate demand, and that's good for the unemployed because they get jobs. And it's also good for the employed because now you can choose between more jobs, and that gives you better bargaining power. Third, your businesses are more insulated from collapse, and collapsing businesses are really bad for poor people because they tend to lose their jobs first when a business collapses. And finally, we're better to fulfill people's consumer preferences, and for the weighing before, consumers matter quite a lot because they are everyone, and poor people consume stuff too. Clean CO.
Cool. Like I said, the opposition wait for a fine speech. See you all in 15 minutes. Please leave the breakout room. That would be marvelous. Cool. Just to be clear, both of you are still happy to have this deliberation recorded.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. That sounds okay.
Yeah, that's fine on my end.
Cool. So if you want to take a minute to come up with an initial call, then we can get started. Cool. Do either of you need any more time, or are we ready to get started?
Just 5 seconds, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Cool. Are you ready to get started? Ayush?
Okay, yeah, I got a call.
Cool. So Kenneth, you want to go first?
Okay, great. I'll go first. So my rankings from first to fourth, I have closing up in first, opening up in second, opening up in third, and closing up in fourth.
Cool.
Do I need to come again, or
Ayush?
did you get that clearly?
I got that clearly,
Okay,
thank you.
great.
Ayush?
So I had CO, OO, OG, and CG.
Yeah, I also largely agree. I think the comparison that is making me think the most is the government bench comparison. So considering that we all sort of have the same intuitive degree, I think it'd be best to prioritize clashes that some of us think are closer than others. I think in this round, and see if you agree that closing opposition are quite clearly ringing around, so we'll deprioritize them in the discussion. Does that sound good with everyone, or do you think there is a close comparison with CO?
No, I think
No,
that's
I
good.
think
That's good.
significantly they win the round.
Yeah, okay. So we'll deprioritize CO preference of the teams. So on the government bench then, I'm just going to articulate why I think the comparison is close and what I think could be an advantage of closing government's favor, because I think that'll be a good place to focus the discussion. So I think a lot of opening government's material is very strongly self-mitigating. So they start their argument on small businesses not needing loyalty schemes because it means they make less profit seems in contradiction to the latter claims about how the loyalty scheme can mean it is bad for some consumers because people recruit profits by selling out poorer people for richer people. So the arguments that I'm strongly taken from opening government are just people consuming badly for them. I think there is a slightly different and possibly better justification than closing government to why people are likely to overspend. So the targeted advertisement allowing for targeted refinement of adverts and science time-sensitive motivations for consumption, I think are slightly maybe better justifications to explain why people overconsume. But I'm still left questioning whether or not this is a sufficient analytical addition of a gov bench. In terms of gov bench, then, responding to that, do people think that was insufficient analysis, or there's a stronger reason why to have opening government over CG?
Okay, I'll just like to respond in two ways. I think the first is that I did credit that to closing governments. That is to say, I do think they were able to analyze why people are likely to overspend. But I didn't see it sufficient enough to speak to substantive matter that came from opening governments. The idea on how there is likely to be tax on newness, given that they want to offset the cost that they are giving to people that are loyal customers to them. It means then the prices that exist for those people on the ground, that is to new customers that try to patronize these firms, is likely to be higher. I think that was the worst of impact because the whole idea of consumerism, I think CG directly contradicts it because at the top of their speech, they say that the rewards that these people are getting from this loyalty bonus is insufficient to accrue OO's impact, meaning that it's just marginal, like just one cup of coffee or just one, there was a fruit they used as an example. So I felt they already contradict themselves when they say the impact from that loyal bonus is marginal. Then they go on to say people will still spend vicariously because there's extra like level of benefits they're likely to get. So that kind of mitigated their own impact in and of themselves. So I think the extensions, or rather the material from opening government, just became more relevant in that regard.
Ayush, anything to add?
Yeah, so I found with a lot of like CG's points is that there's a lot of like assumptions based on like, okay, people will do things because they kind of what's the word called? Yeah, so it's kind of like people do things because they're more likely to do them, and like they use the example of Sephora and or Walmart or something like that, and it's kind of the idea that yeah, okay, I know I understand like okay, yeah, maybe like one person would feel that way, but I don't understand how that actually impacts like why is it better? Whereas with OG, it sort of felt as if like I had a bit more like understanding of who exactly was affected and why it was better for them in comparison to like CG, I think.
Yeah, so yeah, I agree. So I do think the question on GovBench, in terms of thinking about which analysis was stronger, is which team is actually addressing the question that is posed by the analysis, which is why the consumption patterns are bad. I think closing government does provide a different way of explaining why consumption increases, but not necessarily why that consumption is universally bad. Like obviously there's environmental harms, etc., but why they should trump people satisfying their needs. Or the question that posed by closing opposition was just, you know, why it reduces the cost of everything else. Yeah, so this is sufficient. And thank you for having the discussion. So let's look at other teams then. So let's have a look at top half. Kenneth, you want to give us a minute summary of why you think opening opposition is able to beat opening government?
Is this me or is this
Okay.
oh,
Oh, it's
sorry.
Kenneth.
It's kind of, yeah. Okay, great. So there are a couple of things that went to weigh up in the opening half. So I think firstly, the material that comes from opening government in terms of how these people are likely to offset costs. So it means the new people that decide to patronize these businesses, they're likely to like purchase goods more expensively. The reason why I don't buy that is of twofold. One, I think opening up is able to explain to you the majority of small businesses that exist within this area, they have every incentive to patronize customers or attract customers to themselves. This means one, they are actually proximate to poor people. But secondly, poor people like to patronize these small firms. Why? Because they are more proximate to them. So you have things like transport costs that doesn't allow them to go to big businesses to buy every single time. So in most instances, they don't shop from the same small store, the small convenience store that exists that is close to them. This essentially means two things. One, these businesses are not irrational enough to just be giving these people things that are going to make them to have losses, given that they want to preserve poor customers. But secondly, it means that the whole idea of how big businesses are likely to outcompete small business doesn't necessarily exist because majority of the working class do patronize these small businesses because they are more proximate to them and they don't want to have any incurred costs. I think the importance of this way of them proves two things. One, the material of opening governments that these people are going to just, try and offset costs doesn't exist. Given that small businesses or even big businesses don't have that incentive, I think the framing also takes it out. Given they say in most instances it's excess supply. So what this looks like is that when they have excess supply of a product, they decide to just give it to a consumer as a reward loyalty bonus. But they are rational enough to not just incur so many costs that they just have to offset to new customers. That is one. But secondly, given that big businesses are not likely to outcompete small businesses, right? Because small businesses are the ones that poor people are more likely to patronize. But secondly, they have every incentive to preserve these customers. It means they don't want customers to be essentially, they're not just going to incur large costs on these customers. And then finally, it means big businesses are not going to just outcompete them. They can still have a fair advantage to compete in the market space. I think this three ways then directly conflict opening government's claim. And I think opening up sufficiently was able to beat them on every class that they posted from the top of PM to the end of EPM.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would largely agree. Anything to add, Ayush?
Yeah, no, I also largely agree. I just found like also as well the burdens of OO kind of were a little bit more restrictive in comparison to CO. So I think that's kind of why CO are easily able to take over OO, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah. So if we consider maybe the final, what we think is potentially a closer comparison, closing opposition's relative ones, which is the short diagonal. So are you trying to explain why you think closing government is unable to beat opening opposition?
So I find that like opening opposition, a lot of like closing government's arguments kind of have revolved around assumptions as to this might happen because of this, and I find that opening's opposition's arguments kind of still have more basis in like this is how it works within the real world and this is how this is relevant, how it's actually going to work. Whereas I feel like CG's claims are a bit more confused with like going into like a lot of variety of different things. And I've sort of found O's just to be a bit more like concise in terms of okay, this is how it actually impacts like people and businesses and why it's better for these people. But it's harder to get that from CG. So I found that OO kind of win that clash a bit more easily.
Yeah, anything to add, Kenneth?
Yes, I largely agree with what he said, but in terms of how I read the scale of impact, so what I basically read was the fact that they were able to show how this will benefit consumers on open upside of the world, especially the working class. I think closing government analysis, which you have pointed out on consumerism and how people are likely to spend more, the impact of that argument becomes just marginal compared to what we get from open up. I'd like to see benefits both small businesses and both for consumers on the ground. So in terms of scale of impact, OO is able to take ahead of them as well.
Mm-hmm. Cool, I agree. The last comparison is in closing opposition. I don't think we need to get too much into the weeds of closing opposition because I think they are sort of comprehensively, explicitly, and implicitly beating all teams both on their own metrics and have established their own CEO's own metric, which they're also winning on. That is probably the broad reason why closing opposition is beating other teams. Is do you either of you have something in terms of devil's advocate that you think closing opposition are sufficiently weak on to, in this case, lose to opening opposition?
To be honest, there isn't really anything. I think if there's only one thing you could bring, maybe there's a few more logical, like maybe a few more logical gaps within COs, but even then, like it's not really anything of value to really know.
Yeah, I think the only perhaps logical problem with closing opposition is they very much underexplain why businesses will pass on the costs to such a good level, but they do describe why intercompetition means they're going to pass some savings down to a consumer. That is at least one level that I think does inhibit the stronger version of their claim, but not so much so that it gets rid of the claim.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. So we are at a certain amount of time. We are at 3 minutes. So let's just fill in the ballot. I don't think, unless anyone else has anything else they should talk about in terms of comparisons between teams.
I personally don't. I think major
Cool. Okay.
terminology is around before you with them up, so I think it's cool at this point. Except Ayush wants to chip in if you're not too.
No, nothing. I think that's all good. I think everything's cool.
Cool. So can you get the ballot up so we can fill it in together? Let me know when you have it up.
I think I'm still listed as a trainee, so I don't think I need to do anything.
Yeah, you don't need to
Yes,
put anything in, but you can contribute to the discussion if you
Okay.
like. Okay. So yeah, Kenneth, you have it up?
Just give me a second about to pull it up.
No worries.
Okay, I have eyes on the ballot.
Cool. So let's go first, fourth to first. And fourth, we had closing government. Tessa was speaking first. Nithila was speaking second. I'm going to read out our bracket. Tell me if you agree. Arguments are almost exclusively relevant and address most of the core issues around. Occasionally, but not often, arguments may slip into deficits of explanation, simplistic argumentation, peripheral or irrelevant argumentation. Do you think this describes closing government speakers?
Yeah, I think this perfectly sums up the case. I think both from the member of government to the government whip.
Yeah, I think the member is better than the gov whip. Would this be 77-76? Does this sit right with everyone?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah.
Cool.
That sounds
Okay,
good
team
to me as well.
third, which was opening government, we had Sullivan speaking first and Hiya speaking second. I think
first. Sorry.
Sorry, say it again. No, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, oh, I was gonna say first speaker.
Yes, I
think for PM.
I think there was a decent preference. I think let me just read. I think the brackets are different. So I think the DPM is I don't know if the math is going to work out now, but it probably should be in the lower bracket. I think arguments are almost exclusively relevant, although they fail to address one or core issues sufficiently. And then I don't think their responsive work is actually addressing the issue of costings. And I think a lot of the material they bring oftentimes is the thing that's contradicting parts of the PM material. And I think we should reflect this in the ballot. Let me just see if the math works. I can't do math in my head. Okay, the math wouldn't work. As in, you have to be a 78 for PM and a 76, 70. Whoa. No, that math evidently works. Why does that math not work? It's the time.
Yeah, that works.
Obviously. Yeah, so it'd be a 78 for PM and a 76 for Hiya. Sorry, say it again?
Yeah, 76. I said, yeah, 76 is fine. I could even go lower if you want to, but 76 is fine.
Yeah, I think the math is not going to work out. So we'll have to put it the same as government.
Yeah.
Okay. Get the team that came opening opposition. Lucas was speaking first, Chloe was speaking second. Ideas about the positioning in the bracket. Do you think Lucas was stronger than Sullivan?
Yeah,
personally, I don't have.
was.
I don't necessarily have a preference. I think it's like a very slight preference. If there's going to be like a preference between LO and DLO, and it should go to LO anyways, Lucas.
So you can have a 78, 77. So Lucas is 78. I don't think it enters into the higher bracket. And I no longer think it is. I don't think it's made without obvious logical gaps, and the arguments are necessarily well explained. So I don't think it gets into the 79, 82, but I do think it's still quite strong. So 78, 77.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. We get to the team that came first. We had Ziyad speaking first and Freddy speaking second. Team is miles ahead of other teams in comparison, and I think the bracket can jump too. I think both of them are addressing definitely the core issues around. I think each of them have quite strong explanations, and I think do demand strong responses from speakers to beat. I also think they are responding to most of the stronger versions of the arguments provided, particularly within the insulatory weighting, but maybe there are some very well-made arguments that their responses wouldn't currently hit. I think this would describe both speakers.
Yeah, I don't have preference for either.
I don't have a preference as well.
I would have a marginal preference to Freddy, just in terms of comprehensivity. So parts of Ziyad's speech, there are closer to being under explanations, particularly in why the businesses will pass along a lot of costs. Whereas I don't think that this is the same case for Freddy in terms of its response to the material. I think they're far more comprehensive. That would just be a one speak margin, so that'd be an 83 for Ziyad and an 84 for Freddy.
Yeah.
Great.
So I'll just reread everything to make sure we agree. So PM was Sullivan at a 78, BPM was Hiya at a 76, LO was Lucas at a 78, DLO was Chloe at a 77, Member of Government was Tessa at a 77, Government Whip was Nithila at a 76, Member of Opposition was Ziyad at an 83, Opposition Whip was Freddy at an 84. That sounds good with everyone?
That sounds good.
Yeah, that is perfect.
Cool. Thank you. Could someone bring the teams back into the room? That would be okay.
Sure, I'll do it.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
Okay, I've submitted the ballots.
Thank you. Cool. So, you guys want from opening government? Yeah, I probably should turn my camera on, not be anti-social. Oh, that button did not work. Opening opposition? No one's from, oh, how sad. CG?
Here. Here.
Cool, CO. Here. Cool, I think I see Chloe is also, so I'm going to presume Chloe is here. Cool. Thanks everyone. No worries. Thanks everyone for a good debate. We're just going to general feedback, call justifications, that's common. So in terms of general feedback, I think teams here, the biggest delimiter was not just how charitably teams were responding to each other, but how expansive the intuitions underpinning people's behavior was. So obviously in this round, a lot of the arguments about how people will respond to the loyalty system, as in will they overspend, underspend, will they consume as they want to or not. There's a thought of the clash that is underexplored most in the round, as in why people's behavior is likely not just to initially be shifted, but to be in the long term shifted in ways that are good or bad. That's maybe just one area of under exploration, but it is a contingency at least 3 teams in the room had that is quite tight and is underexplored. Apart from that, though, I don't think there's any general feedback that applies to all teams. So the call is as follows. The first went to closing opposition, the second to opening opposition, the third to opening government, and the fourth to closing government. In terms of a general commentary of the comparisons, we think closing opposition sort of emphatically wins the round, whereas the other teams' comparisons are a bit closer. So why is the ranking the way it is? So starting with top half then. So the question that is really interesting that determines the top half is what actually does the loyalty scheme change in the round? The reason this is an important question for top half is there is a lot of self-mitigation within the opening government constructive arguments. So the start of opening government arguments is we should care about small businesses because they have to then take on loyalty schemes in order to compete or have some competitive advantage against bigger businesses. This is bad because it reduces their profit margins because they have to give some money back to the consumer. At that point then, if that is true, then that demonstrates that I have to care more about small businesses than the consumers in order for opening government to win. As is pointed out by closing opposition, I do think there's a little lack of work to explain why I should predominantly care about small businesses, particularly if the framing is that people who are in need can shift and move around, which means the people who are in need, like poor people, aren't dependent on the survival of small businesses. What they need is actually the reduction of costs, etc. Thus, opening opposition on this level of opening government is clearly winning, because opening opposition just demonstrates that people who are poorer ought to be able to, want to have reduced costs in order to buy things that they need for a cheaper level. If this is true, then it's unclear at the end of opening government why I should care predominantly about small businesses as opposed to the poorer people that by their own logic can now access more reductions of prices, not just within big businesses, but now small businesses. If it is true that the loyalty scheme makes small businesses easier to compete against large businesses, this also suggests that consumers are therefore better advantaged by having small businesses access the loyalty scheme. The second then structure, which sort of weakens that first part of the argument on small businesses, is then towards the end of PM and in DPM, it's justified that there is an inherent unfairness in loyalty schemes, because loyalty schemes, because they would disadvantage the business to a certain level, as in richer people will be able to make more advantage than poorer people, in response to opening opposition, both preemptively and practically, they say then the businesses would have to readjust costs to make sure they can balance the costing that they're having to lose. as in they were going to charge poorer people slightly more in order to make up for the deficits that richer people are using for the loyalty scheme. Apart from the argument that I'm not sure why the loyalty scheme has a stratification in the first instance, but then it's not clear why like there's an inhibition of who can join the loyalty scheme. That would create a sort of immoral hierarchy. Independent of that, this seems to mitigate the first argument, which is small businesses would be able to adjust to the profit loss function of the loyalty scheme by being able to redress that cost against people who aren't a member of the loyalty scheme. Then I'm not actually very unclear at the end of that argument why small businesses are actually going to be unprofitable by a version of it. But even if we take that and the class then shifts to fairness, it's unclear then, considering that there's the optionality to enter into a loyalty scheme, why opening opposition still then aren't true, which is people therefore getting more money out of it as a result of being a member of that loyalty scheme. The argument is obviously about the idea of fairness and where that cost is appropriated, but I think a little bit more justification has to be said to why that is by its nature, because it's optional, as in people can opt in and out of loyalty schemes and can move around to different companies, not therefore immoral. The latter element of this is, even if we accept the opening opposition tenets, and this is shifting to the opening government tenets and shifting to the opening opposition metric of what is in the interest of poor people, opening government says it is not in the interest of people who need financial resources for a few reasons. The first is that it increases the amount at which these people consume. They are more interested in consumption patterns, as in like costs, etc., but it just shifts their consumer patterns in a way that is bad for them, either because it's gamified, which means it increases their amount of spending, this is a reminder of status reinforcement and causes you to have irrational buy-in because of financial stress. All of these are explanations why people will end up buying more, which once again mitigates the first argument, because if people are therefore likely to buy more as a result of the loyalty scheme, then smaller businesses would make more money. Independent of that point, that doesn't necessarily prove it is bad for people to overconsume, right? If opening opposition's arguments is some people can't actually consume any more than they could currently, they need to satisfy their basic needs. Then opening government is like, yeah, but the loyalty scheme makes you able to buy more and incentivized to buy more. Why is it a harm at the end of the round? Like if the opening government argument is we should prioritize the financial interests of small businesses, if that is increasing the consumption into small businesses, why is that a bad thing? On the flip side, then, if the argument is just purely rebuttal against opening opposition about it makes people's consumption bad, it doesn't actually enforce why the consumption is disaligned to individuals' interests. This is particularly important with the DLO responsive material addressing how the loyalty scheme works. The opening opposition say in response to opening government, there is sufficient competition between larger businesses such that any interests that extend beyond price, like quality, can be achieved when individuals are jumping through price hoops. So if it's the case that opening government cares about the quality of the resource and thus the provision that is provided by the market, opening opposition I've already pointed out, there's not a sufficient amount of small or large competition, regardless of what happens on the side. So if opening government by their own framing is correct, that things like supplier contracts, status quo recognition for smaller businesses is an aspect that makes small businesses hard to compete against large. It's unclear why the loyalty scheme prevents that from happening, particularly as opening government says larger businesses are able to have more of a loyalty scheme or more pernicious of a loyalty scheme, suggesting again in rebuttal to themselves, there actually isn't that inter-competition that is created by loyalty schemes. So then when opening opposition says there is sufficient inter-competition between Sainsbury's and Tesco's, for instance, or whatever large chains there are, which can pass the cost reductions down to the consumer, they access the only link opening opposition needs to explain why people who are poorer or people who are in need of reduced prices of consumption can actually get it as a result of the loyalty scheme. As in, if opening government is correct that the increasing pressure of the loyalty scheme means more people have to buy into it, which creates the competition like opening opposition wants, why the loyalty scheme gets better over time. It's unclear why, even if it's increasing consumption, as opening government says, that consumption is bad, because opening opposition say the consumption is an a priori good for these individuals. At that point, then, opening opposition is winning on the what is good for poor people metric, and indeed is probably also winning on what is good for businesses metric, which indeed is like a mirror of what closing opposition do, but closing opposition also analyze it far better, that I'll explain later. That is what we see in the top half comparison. What happens then in the closing government, opening government comparison? Closing government adds a few things to the round. First, they explain in attempts to respond to opening opposition that actually, in some lines to the response of opening government, there are already cheap options for people, as in airlines market themselves by being poor, or there, as the EPM says, there are coffee shops for people that market themselves as being poor. Actually, the optionality for these poor people is not the margin of the debate, it's just generally. As in some ways, closing opposition make this remark about opening opposition, I think is unfair. As in, even if opening opposition is claiming when talking about poorer people, their analysis actually does cross-apply to all people who are making a reduction of the prices of their consumption. So this attempt to make it marginal isn't that successful. But if it is true that the aspects of there already being cheaper options and thus overconsumption habits anyway, this is sort of self-mitigating to the claim as well. So it doesn't actually change the margin in the round, because then people will be overspending anyway if it's cheaper. So that kind of responsive work isn't doing enough damage for opening opposition to beat them, nor is it a better type of response than opening government, because it isn't actually shifting the margin towards government bench in any way. The second is just why overspending exists. This is where I think closing government gets closer to having stronger analysis than opening government. It's purely from a metric of specificity, which is, the opposition whips metric I've heard before as he judges, is insofar as overconsumption exists because companies want to profit maximize, which is looking like things like bulk consumption as opposed to what opening opposition says, which is things that are about to go away, waste, for instance. The way in which they're able to push consumption habits that are bad is by targeted advertisements, which is opening government's line, but CG adds the argument about it allows for targeted refinement by having a loyalty scheme and creates time-sensitive motivation of consumption, and some explanation of sunken cost fallacy, which is just naming the thing opening government in PM has already described. That second line, whilst it is far more specific than opening government, doesn't answer the question that opening government's analysis lacks, which is that is all well and true, as in it creates time-sensitive motivations for consumption, and maybe this does increase consumption, but why is that increased consumption a bad thing? This is when the impact from closing government maybe becomes more important, which is insofar as overconsumption exists, the reason that is bad is either people purchase beyond their needs. This isn't actually justified. All closing government has justified is targeted advertisements make people buy things they would want to buy anyway and makes them buy quicker or more of it. If opening opposition is still correct that what people tend to buy are things they need, then it's unclear if closing government by their assertion is correct that people will spend beyond their needs. The analysis had to be a bit about why companies are successful in being able to push people to buy things they don't want to do. Opening opposition has rested this challenge to you. I think an assertive challenge from you is insufficient at this stage. You need some explanation to why it would be successful in pushing you beyond your normal consumption habits, particularly as opening opposition says poorer individuals and people they care about are far more cost conscious about what they're going to buy in the first case. Thus then, the thing that would rest the victory for closing government is on the environmental impact. So independent of opening government, they say a harm of overconsumption isn't just the nature of it, but the fact that you increase environmental harms and increase food wastage and have more clutter in your house. These all things are true. I think it probably does increase the use of single-use plastics, does increase food wastage. Why is that the be-all and end-all of the round relative to opening government? Also arguments of overconsumption by the nature of making people waste their money, or some argument about why it makes the market less competitive, which presumably means you can't supply as much to people in need. I would need a little bit more to understand, firstly, why there is a sufficient margin on environmental change or sufficient margin on waste that I should weigh that explicitly above other things. The CG attempt at weighing is certainty, fine, but I don't actually think your margin to prove that these things actually happen is certain enough. I mean, you get the stupid POI from Ziyad, like, maybe loyalty schemes can mean you do more environmental stuff. Like, that might be stupid, but it actually does point out that closing government doesn't have the analysis to explain why the overconsumption wouldn't be aligned to interests, which interestingly closing government themselves raises by saying we're becoming more aware as a market and a consumer about what is good or bad. Like, a lot of loyalty schemes actually now currently have, like, you have like carbon offset, and maybe this is too specific. There's carbon offsetting loyalty schemes that exist in airlines, for instance, because it's performative for them. But ignore that. That's kind of the question I'm having is why would it result in the environmental stuff you're talking about? Thus, if you're weighing on certainty, it's unclear why you actually are more certain in producing environmental harms than opening opposition, which is allowing poor people to consume stuff, opening opposition being, that consumption being more fair, or having businesses that are able to have more of a resource capacity. So fortunately, that's why closing government is losing out top half. I do think the gov bench is quite close, as in the analysis is very close to being sufficiently more persuasive to me, but not the reasons I hopefully I've articulated quite sufficiently. Last but not least, what happens in the closing opposition world? Closing opposition do a number of things very well. I'm just making sure I haven't yapped too long. Oh, cool. So what does closing opposition argue? Closing opposition, I think, punctures the debate by explaining why this is both good for businesses in general, but also good for the metrics that each team cares about. So the general reason closing opposition wins is I think they beat everyone on their own metrics, on each team's metric, and indeed by opposition with explain why their metric of consumer data stabilizing businesses and profit margins is good. How did they do that? I'm not going to list through all of the analysis, but at the core, closing opposition justifies why the data enables companies to reduce their costings. From that, when they reduce their costings, that they're likely to pass this on to consumers. Yes, they do rest on the same mechanization as DLO, which is intercompetition, etc. I think you can rest upon mechanization of other teams if you do something differently and more creative, increase the margin of the claim, which closing opposition is uniquely doing by explaining why the information actually does reduce costs. This does massively increase the margin of opening oppositions claim in the round, as they say in themselves, not just affecting now poor individuals, but just people beyond that, not just to an intuitive level that I can intuit at the end of opening opposition, but to a level where I have some level of confidence, certainty that all people are able to accrue, not just people who have loyalty schemes. Obviously, the claims would have been independently stronger, and I think this is the weakest element of closing opposition claims, why the costing is passed down to a large level. So a bit more work could have been done there. But aside from that, that is sufficient to unlock the strategy of closing opposition. Indeed, there is some peripheral arguments at the end about how it means the businesses are more stabilized, that it can drive specific consumer patterns for stability, for future investment. All these things are probably true. A bit more work could have been done with them. But now I'm more convinced that now the business is not just more stable, but broadly more stable and broadly more financially competent, meaning that they advantage everybody, even people outside of the loyalty scheme. How does this beat other teams? I'm not going to repeat all the weighing above opening opposition, but we largely buy the weighing opening closing opposition provides. So the increase the applicability of the motion to a number of individuals, the increase the certainty that is true, the increase the comparative margin on why the information that you uniquely get from opposition side is more advantaged than closing the government side. They also have the better responsive challenge to explain why it is in the interest of small businesses and consumer patterns in order to have this type of information. The challenging opening government directly explain why small businesses would be more economically advantaged by having a loyalty scheme, which in itself takes opening government's first argument at their best. So even if it's the case that opening government is correct, that small businesses are initially disadvantaged by having to have a loyalty scheme, they explain that the loyalty scheme allows them to have a level of certainty and predictability, which is actually quite important for the small business that are more unstable in itself. And I think also Freddy directly outweighs why I should care less about small businesses a priori, well, not a priori, but by analysis, describing a bit flippantly, but probably true, that maybe they're in a privileged position. And just in terms of the scale of the actors, we're talking about the people who consume the businesses are probably far easier. And then saying even if the small businesses collapse, large businesses are likely to buy them up in the first instance, meaning there's no delta margin here. So they are beating opening government, even on their own metric, which we thought was somewhat self-mitigated, taking opening government at their best. Last then to closing government, they respond adequately to the data information argument, but the core argument of closing government about overconsumption is refined to be beneficial from closing government opposition's world. As in overspending is actually beneficial for the subsidization of consumption, which not only is what opening opposition wants, but it's something that opening government thought was important to have existing for their hierarchical, like some people are advantaged by club cards, some people aren't. Closing opposition say all people would be advantaged, which also breaks that part of opening government. Obviously, there's not that much of a response to the actual impact of closing government about environmentalism, etc. However, the analysis that linked to why environmentalism would be changed significantly by a loyalty scheme is impaired. Although a lot of the R&D stuff on member of opposition leads me to believe that there are ways in which, if member of government was correct, that there is a pressure for things like environmental innovation anyway, allowing businesses the capacity in order to do that kind of thing, as in Ziyad says with his POI, give you single-use cups. Maybe that is possible. A bit more explicit analysis there would have been useful to solidify that margin completely, but it is sufficient there. So that's how closing opposition beats the rest of the room, and that is all comparisons. I will stick around if you want any further feedback, clarification, queries. Good luck for future rounds.